Hello, I'm Dennis Tucker. I want to invite you to sit down for a few minutes, open your Bible, stay along with me. We're going to look at the book of Genesis. Go back to the book of Genesis here. And as I was thinking about some of the events in Genesis, there's a passage that is brought up that came to my mind. It's about Jacob. And Jacob is a big part of Genesis, either directly in events in his life or his family is a big part of it, the latter part of Genesis. But there's an event that occurs, a scene that occurs in Genesis, the 47th chapter. And that is you have Jacob facing Pharaoh. And in Genesis 47, verse 8, starting there, it says, Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How old are you?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they had not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their pilgrimage." Now, some translations would read there, "Few and difficult have been the days of my life." But we may look at this passage and think, 130 years today is a long time. If somebody would live to be that old, we would really, they would make the Genesis book world records, or they'd be noted for the fact of how they are in relationship to everybody else. But really, when Jacob says 130 years, is that we have to keep in mind now Abraham lived to be 175 years of age. In Genesis 25th chapter, we find that. And Isaac lived to be 180 years of age. In Genesis 35, verse 28, it tells us that. So in relationship to his father and grandfather, Jacob was not as old as they had been when they passed away. And so perhaps that's what some of the reference is, the fact that he had not attained the years of his fathers. But what I want to focus on is the phrase of the days being difficult or days being evil. And it just got me thinking about all the things that Jacob had indeed had endured in his life and some of the events of his life. And so I want to look at here in Genesis, and for the most part, we're just going to stay in the book of Genesis, going through the life of Jacob and all the hardships that he endured. And the first one is the fact that Jacob was born a twin. And in Genesis 25, starting verse 21, it said, "Now Isaac pleaded the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah's wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, 'If all is well, why am I like this?' So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 'Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger.' So when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in the womb, and the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment over, so they call his name Esau. Now, being a twin can be good or bad. I don't mean to imply the fact that if you're a twin, that's automatically a bad thing. But what we see is the very beginning of this relationship between Esau and Jacob, there is a bigger picture involved. And that is the picture of what would become two nations that would be rival nations. Esau being the father of the nation of Edom, we read about later on in the Bible. And, of course, Jacob here being Israel and a father Israelite nation. But we see inside the womb that they were struggling with each other, and that's why she said, "If all's well, why am I like this?" And that literally these children were kind of like fighting inside the womb, fighting each other. And we see that their relationship was one of a struggle with each other from the very point of before the birth all the way through the life. It seemed like most of the life, at least, that they struggled with each other. And so that's not easy to have a sibling or your sibling that's always struggling with you. You're struggling with them, and they were very different. In Genesis 25 verse 27, it says, "So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents." And so they were quite different, although they were twins. So this gets us to the second thing. First one is being born twins, but the struggle between those two twins in particular. The second thing is the fact that their parents played favorites. If you go on, after reading about Esau and Jacob being very different, we find that they were loved differently. In Genesis 25, verse 28, Isaac loved Esau because he had his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And so, now this should not be read as detesting or hating once. It was a case that Isaac hated Jacob, or that Rebekah hated Esau, but here the love means the love less than, and that they did have their favorites. They have their favorites here. And such can create sibling rivalries, can create problems, because you find children learn pretty quickly. And if one parent is favoring them, and if the other parent favors the other sibling, they pick on that very quickly. And they can use their parents. They can try to get what they want from one particular parent and sidestep the other parent. And so they were being treated differently. They were being treated, and this is again not a good thing in families. And the third thing is, as you go on in their life, we see that Esau decides to sell his birthright for a bowl of stew. And you go down in Genesis 25, verse 29. Now Jacob cooked the stew, and Esau came in the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary." Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob says, "Sell me your birthright as of this day." Then Esau said, "Look, I'm about to die, so what is this birthright to me?" Then Jacob said, "Swear to me as of this day." So he swore to him, and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. And then he ate and drank, rose, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now, one thing I kind of did not mention earlier, I should have, is that the name Jacob, and it means to take by the heel. And in the birth of Esau and Jacob, we find the struggle between those two. But also Jacob's name means the idea of supplanter, one who kind of takes advantage of the other. And we kind of see this here. Now, one can argue that Jacob was not being very brotherly here, but instead of just giving his brother Esau some stew because he's hungry, he'd been out in the fields, instead he's going to use this to his advantage. He's going to take advantage of his brother. We can make that argument about this, but also you have to realize that Esau obviously did not treasure his birthright as he should have. This birthright was worse than this. Birthright meant that he'd be favored, and so instead of thinking for the long term, Esau just thought about the immediate. Now, when he said, "I'm about ready to die here," perhaps that was an exaggeration. I know there are times that we may feel as if I don't get something to eat, I'm just going to drop dead, or I won't be able to move anymore. But very seldom are we really in that situation. But what we do see here, that Esau really did not value that birthright as he should have. And so this created a problem between Esau and Jacob for that time onward, as far as the relationship. Not that it needed more problems, but it created more problems. And then another thing is that Jacob tricks Isaac into getting Esau's blessing in Genesis 27 chapter. In the first part of that chapter, Isaac instructs his son Esau. Isaac thinks he's on his deathbed. No, he really isn't, because he lives a number of years later, about 20, 30 years later, more. By this point, Isaac is an old man. He can't really see very well. And he calls an Esau to him and basically tells Esau, "Go out there and find some game, go kill it, bring it back, cook it, and bring it to me, and I'll give you your blessing." Now, let me interject here something for just a second before we get back into the main thought here. And I'm really not sure the distinction between the birthright and this blessing. After reading some of it, it seems like maybe that again, Isaac is willing to give Esau an additional blessing beside the idea of the birthright. Some believe that they were kind of quote equals, but Esau really didn't deserve this blessing. Whatever you want to think about it, that's okay. But the idea here is that Isaac intends to bless Esau. And Rebekah hears this. And at that point, Rebekah kind of kicks in here in Genesis 27, verse 6. So Rebekah spoke to Jacob, her son, saying, "Indeed, I heard your father speak to Esau, your brother, saying, 'Bring me game and make savory food for me, that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. Now go to the flock and bring me from there 2 choice kids of the goats. And I will make savory food from them for your father, such as he loves. And I shall take it to your father, they may eat it, and he may bless you before his death.'" Now Jacob, as he's told this here, kind of points out to his mother, made some of the danger of this here ruse that he's going to try to play on, that she wants to play on her husband Isaac. And one is that, well, that Esau's a hairy man and I'm not, and so she has a solution there to put on animal skin so that when Isaac touched Jacob, they would touch his hair and think that's Esau. And so she basically, this plan works, that Jacob goes out and kills these two young goats. She cooks the food for him and brings it he brings it to Isaac and receives the blessing, a great blessing. And so all this works very well, except for the part of what happens afterwards. And that is when Esau comes back and he finds out that actually his brother Jacob had received the blessing that Isaac intended to put on Esau. They see that Esau does not take this well. In Genesis 27, verse 41, so Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then I will kill my brother Jacob. Now, I'm not sure what Rebekah thought was going to happen after this ruse was played on Isaac, after Jacob received the blessing. But we see what happens here is that Esau is not going to take this just lying down. Esau has every intention of killing his brother. And so this forces Jacob to have to leave home. And again, that's something I have to deal with. Jacob's going to have to deal with the fact that his brother wants to kill him, and he has to leave his home and go to a faraway country. Now, as he goes to the faraway country, goes back to the homeland, Ur Chaldees, Haran, up there where Abraham came out of originally. Jacob goes and meets basically part of his family, extended family. And he meets this young lady by the name of Rachel. And he falls in love with Rachel. Rachel has a father by the name of Laban. And basically that there's an agreement made that Jacob will work 7 years and receive Rachel as a wife. However, Laban has other thoughts. So Laban actually exchanges daughters. Leah's the oldest daughter. And so in Genesis 29, verse 16, it said, now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel's beautiful form and appearance. Now let me stop right there and just kind of say that depending on who you're reading after, some believe that this meant that Rachel's eyes were weak and that she could not see well. Others believe that that Leah's eyes was like that. And the other believes that really what it meant was that they were very beautiful, but Rachel was the prettiest overall. And so, as pick back up verse 18, he said, now Jacob loved Rachel. So he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban says, better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love they had for her. So far, so good. But then let's get down to verse 23. Now when they came past in the evening, they took Leah's daughter and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. The next day, Jacob wakes up and realizes he's got the wrong woman. He has the wrong wife here, that he has Leah instead of Rachel. And so he turns around and has to work 7 more years for Rachel, makes an agreement that he'll work 7 more years for Rachel. But now he has 2 wives. And instead of just 2 wives, he also has 2 handmaidens. That is, that Rachel has a handmaiden by the name of Bilhah, and Leah has a handmaid by the name of Zilpah. We're really not used to this idea of handmaids or concubines, things like that mentioned in the Bible. Basically, there was a caste system. Okay, and these women were treated more like slaves or more like simply animals than they were really human beings. And so they are in a position of being these handmaids to their masters, basically, these 2 women, Rachel and Leah. And this created a lot of strife between the sisters. And that is, when you look at Genesis 29, verse 30, it said, then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served Laban with still another 7 years. So honestly, there is favorites here. And that is, okay, he has Leah, the first wife. He has Rachel, second wife. He loves the second wife more than he does the first wife. And so we find that they kind of get into this competition, these sisters do, as far as having children. Children was valued greatly at this time period. And still today in many cultures, children are valued greatly. And so we find in Genesis 29, verse 32, that this competition even involves the handmaids. That is, that Rachel doesn't have a child, so she wants to give her handmaid to Jacob to have a child, and that's going to be her. Rachel will be counted as one of Rachel's children. But in Genesis 29, verse 32, it says, Leah conceived the bore son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. And notice the next phrase. Now, therefore, my husband will love me. And, that's a sad commentary. That's a sad comment right there, and that is, now maybe he will love me. And then verse 33 then said, then she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me his son also. And she called his name Simeon. And conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I've borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. As you read all the way through this here, we see kind of like how Rachel felt about this here, that she understood she was not loved like Rachel was. And so you have that aspect of it. But then also Rachel's not having children, and Rachel turns around and in essence blames Jacob because she's not getting pregnant. In Genesis 30 and verse 1. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children else I die. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel and said, am I in place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of your womb? All the way through this here, we see the strife and division, the envy between these sisters and Jacob as he's being a part of this here. This was not a happy home, really. And so the point, and they're getting the point as far as the home life, that they're even bargaining over Jacob and his affection when Reuben goes out and finds these mandrakes. The mandrakes are kind of like a flower. And brings home the flower, and Rachel wants those mandrakes. Rachel basically tells Leah, tell your son to give me the mandrakes. Genesis 30, verse 14. Now Reuben, when the days of wheat harvest, had found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, is it not a small matter you have taken away my husband? Notice here the whole idea, you took away my husband. I was married to him first, and now you've taken him away from me. Will you take away my son's mandrakes also? And Rachel said, therefore he will lie with you tonight, for your son's mandrakes. And when Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me, for I surely hired you my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. And again, it's hard for us to kind of envision this here, but basically again, that Rachel and Leah are bargaining over Jacob, or who's going to spend time with, who's going to receive his affection. And so as you go through this here, this was not a happy home life here. And then also Jacob's relationship with Laban, his father-in-law. Now, I already mentioned here and point out that Laban made an agreement with Jacob for Rachel. And then he substitutes Leah in without Jacob realizing at first. And so there's obviously some trickery going on here. Now, some people may think, well, Jacob's kind of getting what he deserved here because Jacob also was a supplanter and he also did a lot of trickery in his life. Well, as we go through this here, we see that not only was there that distrust, that innocence, but also they were business partners. Jacob is working for Laban, and they really didn't trust each other. Now, don't really have time, but if you read on into this relationship between each other, Jacob makes an agreement with Laban as far as what he'll receive for pay, and part of this was going to be out of the flock. And basically, Jacob was supposed to receive the part of the herd that's speckled and the weaker part, but in essence, Jacob actually is receiving the better part of the flock. The speckled and And what we normally think of as would be the inferior part of the flock actually turns out to be a better part of the flock at Laban's expense. And so Jacob is getting ready to go back home. And he, in essence, loads his family and leaves without telling Laban. Again, showing the mistrust they had for each other. And as Laban finds out, he goes and rushes after Jacob. And in Genesis 31, in verse 38, here's what Jacob says. He said, "These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried your young, and have not eaten the rams or your flock. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, neither stolen by day nor stolen by night. There I was in a day, drought consumed me, and the night by frost by night, and my sleep deprived me of my eyes." In other words, look at this. He's saying, "I worked hard for you. That if a part of animal got killed, I was the one responsible, and I'm the one that bore the loss, not you." And so verse 41 says, "Thus I've been in your house 20 years. I've served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flock. You have changed my wages 10 times. As I read through this, I just see Jacob's exasperation here as far as, look all I've done for you. Look how I had to work for you. And you keep on changing my wages. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and I rebuked you last night. If it was for a fact that God was watching over me, you would have, now I would be leaving here without anything." Now again, this shows a total mistrust between Jacob and Laban. And so there's that part of this here, as that Jacob had to bear. And then Jacob's sons. Jacob has 12 sons, and we see also a daughter, Dinah. In Genesis 34, Dinah goes out to meet the daughters of the land. It's kind of how it's phrased for us in Genesis 34 chapter. She winds up coming across this man by the name of Shechem, and basically she gets raped. Now he loves her, and he wants to marry her. He goes back to, his father goes to Jacob, and basically there's a deal made, and that is with Simeon and Levi, the men of the city, and that is, if you have all your men circumcised, then we will allow this marriage, and that'll be that. Well, what happens is that when the men of the city are circumcised, Simeon and Levi decide to go in and kill all the men of the city. And so in Genesis 34, verse 30, here's the fallout from that. "Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have troubled me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed, my household and I. But they said, should we treat our sister like a harlot? Should they treat our sister like a harlot?" Jacob point here Jacob is making is that you have killed these folks, and everybody else in this land don't hate us. Now, it turned out that actually it kept the people of Jacob separate from the people of the land. But again, his worry, his concern was that we are now despised by everybody. You made everybody our enemy. And then he's going on how his sons treat Joseph, another son. And that is that a well-known story here that they wound up despising the brother of Joseph, and they wound up selling their brother into slavery. And then come back to Jacob and making a scene here where Jacob thinks that Joseph has been killed. Genesis 37, verse 31. "So they took Joseph's tunic, killed the goats, and dipped the tunic in blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought to the father and said, we have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not? And he recognized it and said, it's my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. And it goes on and said, without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days." There's few things that can be more harmful, more painful to a parent than the thought of losing a child. And just imagine these years of Jacob, these days of Jacob as mourning for Joseph, and his brothers realizing he's not dead. We sold him into slavery. And I didn't even mention, so those sons of hardships that Jacob could be referred to. And I didn't even mention the death of Rachel, which was his beloved wife, the one he really loved, and then the years of famine in the land before they go to Egypt. All that have been hard. And so, but those are some of the high points as far as the difficult days of Joseph. Now, let me just for a few minutes here, just brief few minutes here, make some points about this. Jacob's days of trouble. The first point is a lot of the problems that Jacob had originated in the home. All the way from his parents playing favorites of Isaac loving Esau and Rebekah loving Jacob, to the rivalry between the two children as they were battling each other, of them realizing that one parent loved one more than the other. A lot of times today, when you see, children in school, where children are misbehaving, children are having issues, and children are just kind of out of control, a lot of that problem deals with the home. I know my wife, a number of years ago, did some substitute teaching in schools, and there would be times I'd be around some of these kids, and these kids, some of them would just be a mess. I mean, just kind of, really? How can anybody act that way? How can anybody think that way? And I started to realize a lot of the reasons because of their home life. Our home life affects us, and it can be a blessing or a curse. Many times in this passage that we read about here, we just see a lot of the problems was centered on the home. A lot of the problems today in our culture, in our society, is centered on the home. And we need to make sure we have our home right. We need to make sure that we are bringing up our children and nurture admonition of the Lord. And so that's the first thing, is that a lot of Jacob's problems really centered on the home. The second is the danger of deception. And that is the deception, especially of basically how Jacob received the blessing from Isaac, his father. Now, eventually, and today, a lot of the problems people have is that they deceive. And instead of being truthful, instead of being honest, they can be deceptive, be cunning, be conniving. But yet, the passage in Numbers 32, verse 23 stands out. But if you do not do so, then take note, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. Whenever we decide to see somebody, it eventually is going to come to light. And then what? What's going to happen? And how did Jacob and Rebekah think their deception is going to end? Well, it's the same thing today. We always need to be truthful. We always need to be honest with each other, and don't be trying to pull one over. Don't try to be deceptive. That's second. A third lesson here is marriage is a one-to-one relationship, which kind of goes back to the home, right? And that is a lot of the issues that we spent time with between Rachel and Leah and between their children really is fact that Jacob was not involved in a relationship that the Bible talks about. And a one-to-one relationship. Now, again, that has to be understood today because many children are being brought up with divorces, in the home, mom and dad's getting divorced, and unstable homes, and they're treated like pawns, or there's a rivalry between, maybe moms and mother-in-laws, or moms and stepmoms, or all those kind of things here. And again, many of the problems today of our children because of the unstable homes being brought up in. And just have to keep in mind, we have to get the home life right if we're going to have a stable society, if we're going to have happy lives. And the final point here is God uses imperfect people to accomplish his will. Throughout the Bible, we see God, through his providence, using men who are not perfect, but he used them to accomplish his purpose. We see this with Jacob, as far as God blessing him and Esau and the two nations that would come from them. We see this with the 12 tribes of Jacob becoming the 12 tribes of Israel. We see this with Joseph, a son of Jacob, bringing the nation of Israel, or bringing Jacob and his family into Egypt, and eventually the nation of Israel being formed there. The beginning of the nation really begins when Jacob and the family goes to Egypt. And so as we look at this here, just keep in mind, God used imperfect people to accomplish his will. So these are lessons I think we can learn from this here. And so do you have days of trouble? Well, welcome to the club. But always desire to do what God says to do. Always look to him for guidance and answers in our days of trouble. And always be usable. Be willing to do what God says to do. I appreciate your kind attention. I hope that maybe this will just kind of help you in your study of Genesis and the Bible. And if you have any comments, questions, feel free to ask me. If you can come be with us Lilac Road, you're welcome to do that. Our building's located 1687 Lilac Road, Litchfield, Kentucky. Sunday morning we have Bible classes at 9:30, worship at 10:25. Sundays at 5 p.m. we have worship, and on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. we have Bible classes again. Feel free to share this, hit the like button. Also, any questions you may have or any topics you'd like to discuss, we're glad to do that. I appreciate you watching. Hope you have a good day.